Hello and welcome to our episode of Brews and Bites titled When Does Dense Make Sense? This is episode 11. We have some great guests, but before we get started, just a little housekeeping items we want to cover. We have some great attachments attached to this webinar or webcast. Just go ahead and take a look in the attachments section. If you have questions during the webcast, just go ahead and ask them. We like to take a real informal approach, so please feel free to ask questions at any time. And with that, let me introduce our speakers, or actually have our speakers introduce themselves. We'll start with our guest. So Scott Hamilton, WD's Senior Director of Product Management and Marketing. So how are you, Scott? You want to introduce yourself to everyone?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thanks a lot, Adrian. Glad to join you guys. Again, Scott Hamilton. I own product management, product marketing for the platforms business unit within Western Digital. So super excited to have this discussion with you folks at Caringo.
And where'd you come from? So what's your background? Just so everyone knows, just so we can level set, because you're technical. So I want everyone to understand where your experience comes from, and so you have a lot of experience in the industry.
I do. Thank you. Yeah, probably 30 years across storage, IT, and also communication technologies. So going on 3 years at Western Digital. Before that, I was at Quantum in both primary and secondary storage. Was there for about 17 years, and then a variety of other places before that. So in storage a lot. Started out as an engineer early in my career. Then, as I often say, I crossed to the dark side and wanted to get closer to customers in product management, technical sales. I've enjoyed a lot of roles.
Great. And speaking of the dark side, let's go ahead and introduce Eric Day. So Eric, why don't you introduce yourself? You're a known entity here on Brews and Bites.
Yeah, but I don't know that I'm known for my affiliation with the dark side. I don't know where that came from. I'm Eric Day. I'm in charge of product management at Caringo, and I've worn a bunch of different hats here at Caringo, all the way from the engineering to technical sales. I have come from an IT background. I've been the IT guy in charge of stuff. I've done a lot of consulting for companies and helping them do IT better. What we have quite the catchy name for it at the time, just called it sysadmin. But I've been for the last 14 years at Caringo building the storage product that I always wanted to use throughout my career prior to that.
Great. And this is Brews and Bites. So let's go ahead and talk about the brews that we're drinking. So I'll go first. I'm drinking a brew out of a cup that Sarah Cook, our director of marketing, got us. Our senior director of marketing got me, and it's with this great tea from the Steeping Room, organic Moroccan mint green tea. Very good, very tasty. So let's go to you, Scott. What are you drinking?
I'm an IPA guy, but it's a little early for an IPA, so I decided I'd go with a chilled coffee, but in a pint glass. So kind of a hybrid mode here.
How about you, Eric? What are you drinking?
Well, I am drinking an American ale that comes from the Revolver Brewing Company, and I have it in my glass that's got the golden ratio formula and then the geometric relationship of the golden ratio on it. So that's what I've got.
So you never disappoint, Eric. You always have a pretty good beer that you're drinking. So the topic today is, when does dense make sense? So maybe we could just level set as far as what has gone on with hard drives and hard drive density. So Scott, can you let us know what you've seen from hard drive density? Like, where was hard drive density a few years ago? Where are we now, and where is it going to be in a few years?
Yeah, it's a great question. Rather than go way back in time, maybe I'll go back a few years and kind of date back to when we introduced helium seal technology. So we were the first to introduce that. That was in 2013, so say 7 years ago. And that was a 6 terabyte capacity drive. We just recently announced both 18 and a 20 terabyte, 18 CMR, 20 terabyte SMR. also in the helium seal category, and that represents our 6th generation of technology. So, you can kind of interpolate in between that there's quite a bit of aerial density gains between in that capacity high performance drive between 2013 and 2020. A lot of interesting technologies that we've innovated in, even in the latest generation. Not only was it first in 18 and 20, but it was first in certain technologies. Technologies like energy assist magnetic recording, triple stage actuator, things that all contribute collectively to continue to improve the aerial density and capacity of a drive while providing very high reliability.
So maybe define SMR for everyone out there, because you mentioned SMR and that's a new technology. Can you just give a high-level description of what SMR is and the value, the benefit of SMR?
Yeah, absolutely. So prior to SMR, it was CMR or PMR. Some people use that. Conventional magnetic recording. SMR is basically shingle. So within a zone, one of the ways in which to increase the density is to basically take tracks and shingle them over top of each other. And you can particularly do that for certain types of data sets that are a bit more sequential. So you can put sequential data in certain zones, and it can behave very well in coordination between the device and the software and the host. But that gives you obviously a substantial capacity gain versus 18, which was the CMR. And we've continued to do that over the last couple of generations.
And so when we're talking about density, Eric, what can be done on the storage software side to take advantage of some of the technologies that Scott just discussed from a density perspective?
Yeah, so that it becomes a challenge in a few different ways as you get more dense. With density, it takes a balance between getting all of your eggs in one basket or one server chassis versus having some different places to go to. And so density becomes a balance between how many physical storage servers do you have in your environment that you can go to. Typically, you'd like to have as many paths as reasonable external to the box, because network bandwidth is a big limitation for storage. Getting data in and out from the clients, and so you're doing this balancing act between, I think we have people who ask us all the time, can I just do it all in just one gigantic server? Well, you could, but you're going to give up a bunch of the benefits that you looking at cloud storage for. And so, you get into this thing of, well, I don't want 1,000 different servers to manage. They're all tiny. So you're always looking at how can I still provide the redundancy and the parallelism that I want, and still get a very dense, have the units themselves be very dense, because there is economy in the dense units, and that's why people want to go there with it. And so it's just always a balancing act between how do you design your system properly so that you can get the benefits of the dense hardware, while not bottlenecking yourself on just one way in and one way out of all of that storage.
Yeah, so I mean, you mentioned bandwidth, you mentioned network, you mentioned you kind of alluded to compute, right, processing, and also hard drive space. So Scott, I mean, how does Western Digital address those issues? I mean, we talk about hard drive density, but how about the other kind of compute and network issues? Because I know you have more than just hard drives, correct?
Yes, we do. We have SSD as well. And then in the platforms business unit, we have a combination of specialized servers, and then we have some very high density JBODs and high performance JBOFs. So it's, Eric makes a good point. I mean, sometimes you have to go down a path and you have to figure out, or you think about, okay, what problem am I solving? Is it all about capacity? And And if we think about the cloud, then they want the highest capacity, the greatest density as possible, because then it reduces, significant rack storage, all the power and cooling associated with that. But capacity isn't always the driver. It could be performance. Performance could be a driver. So if it's performance, it may be more about the spindle count as opposed to the capacity per spindle. And, so then it's performance, whether it's performance, throughput or IOPS. So there are different things that we see. In the cloud, we see great adoption of the highest capacity because there's more than likely some other things that are the bottleneck with regard to performance getting there. Versus, if we think about on-prem or if we think about enterprise or OEM, they're not necessarily always adopting the highest capacity at the get-go. It just depends on the use case and if it's more of a capacity driver or a performance driver.
So, and how do you engage with a customer? How do you help them figure that out? So what does a in-field engagement look like for you?
Some of the metrics are fairly simple. If it really is a capacity play and it's a TCO play, then it's going to be about dollars per terabyte at the get-go. But then it's going to be, okay, what sort of density chassis do you have? How deep are they? Do they fit into my environment? Because the deeper I can go, the denser I can get, then I can reduce not only my floor space, but all the associated power and cooling and the management associated with a lot more smaller spindles in smaller density JBODs, right? So again, those are kind of the drivers versus if it's a performance thing, then it's likely talking about either a combination of types of storage or maybe lower capacity spindles because the spindle count is the driver.
Let me and I'll give you kind of the challenge scenario that we get in a lot is that we'll have a customer come to us and say that they want to have decent performance from the get-go, and then they want to grow into a large deployment, and so then it becomes a real a challenge in some with some storage setups, because what you have to do is the hardware that you would deploy for the start, say a less than a petabyte style cluster, is going to be smaller units. But then as you grow, you want to start adding on much chunkier, much more dense, larger storage units, and have a graceful way to kind of evolve, move out the initial starting platform and evolve into this footprint of very large operating units or storage units in the system. And so that it's usually the challenge of you're never really deploying for I'm all about capacity or I'm all about performance. It's usually I want some decent performance, and then I want to grow into this big capacity. I'm usually not going out and buying 10 racks, 20 racks worth of hardware to begin with. I start out with two.
Yeah, it's interesting. Sometimes I think in the industry we talk about scale up versus scale out, but to your point, I mean, it's not so, two directional, if you will. You might start out with a smaller subset because that's the scale that you need. Then, if you need more access, more performance, then you're going to scale out. If you need more capacity for, just retention or, whatever is driving that, then you're going to scale up. Yeah. And you tend to do that, in different steps along the way.
Yeah. So usually when I say I need performance that's good enough, what that usually means is that I kind of have this consistent level of client or application bandwidth, and I need to start there. And then I usually don't need to change that too much over time. And so it turns into a scale up from there kind of situation where you want to then, without giving up that baseline of performance, you then want to scale up.
Right. You got them hooked. You're supplying what they need from a access and a performance perspective, but now they want to add more data to it, but they don't necessarily need more performance.
That's right.
Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a good segue to use case and when it makes sense to go dense, right? I mean, we talked about the, going and actually getting more dense, but I mean, what should users out there look for what use cases are you seeing that are really pushing density to its limits? So let's start with you, Eric, and then we'll go to you, Scott. So what are you seeing out there from a density perspective?
So density, your backups and your archive cases are natural ones for the density case. Just because I'm going to be writing a lot of data, it's not going to be, I'm not going to read it that often. It's there in case I need it. Perhaps it has a defined interest period where I put it out there and I will use it for a while. Shortly after I put it there, and then it comes into it transitions into a different use, where now it just needs to be available for me in case I need it. That could be video assets, that could be backups, archives, that kind of stuff. But I'll let Scott go. But one thing I want to come back to after we're done there is that you can't overlook the internal performance within your system, even in a scale-up case where you say, my client front end doesn't need to be very performant, but do I actually need performance within the system itself? So I'll hold that one till
we'll go to use case and then back to performance. So what are you saying, Scott, as far as drivers of density from a use case perspective, or maybe key metrics that are being crossed that people are saying, okay, well, we have to go to the next level of density?
Yeah, let's talk about some of the drivers of use cases first, perhaps. I mean, what are some people saying that 30% of the data is video? I mean, there's just an enormous amount of video, and it's ever growing, right? So that's driving a lot of density because a lot of people want to save those assets. Other things like IoT or autonomous vehicle, there's a lot of data being collected. And it's not clear exactly what is going to be used, that data is going to be used for. So not only does it need to be captured for the initial assessment, but then, as everything starts to evolve and algorithms improve, then you're going to want to compare and contrast to, the latest collection of data, maybe to some historical data. So a lot of those things are driving a lot of capacity and density. Obviously, the thrust to the cloud. There's a lot of movement to the cloud, but there's also a lot of on-prem and a lot of hybrid. So there you see a mix of density and performance. So it kind of depends on the use case, and it also depends on, the locality of the data and what you're trying to do. Like Eric said, if it's backup in long-term archive, I mean, that's where you're going to get a large adoption of the highest density available because you want to do that in the most cost-effective TCO way possible.
It's write once and read, hopefully never.
Yeah.
Scenario.
And you mentioned you want to go back to performance. I do want to come back to the data discussion. So do you want to make a point about performance, Eric?
Yeah. So obviously, when you're talking about pure in cloud, you just trust and hope that the provider is worrying about what I'm about to talk about. But hardware fails. It just does. Light bulbs fail. Drives fail, power supplies fail, that kind of stuff. And so at some point, you're going to have to do recoveries in your system. Up to statistically, you're doing recoveries all of the time in your system because, at some point you get enough hard drives that, statistically, one of them is always going to be, in a failure mode. And so internal to your system, while you may think that I don't have a lot of client bandwidth needs to it, if I lose a drive or I lose an entire server chassis, now I've got a diminished protection situation, and I need to move some bytes around the system, and I need to move them around quickly within the system so that I can shorten the window during which time that I am at less than desired protection level. And so that's where you will get these sudden needs for a burst of internal bandwidth across all of the components of your system in order to recover information in response to just natural end of life, the natural death of hardware within the system.
Yeah, so I guess to summarize your point, I mean, it's not just about density. Well, density there's a lot of different angles to density, right? It's just not about the ability to store. It's about the ability to protect, and
Yeah.
I assume that the ability to access the content too, right? Depending on your application, you mentioned the speed of the application and requirements there.
Mhm.
So those are two good things to look at. I mean, it's also kind of a good segue to the next topic is, well, we're creating a lot of data, and I mean, should everything be stored at this point, right? And I mean, Scott, you brought up a few good points in your last response, but I mean, what do you two think? I mean, should everything created be stored at this point?
Well, it's interesting because I think we all see everything that's being written about, and we talk about the zettabyte world, right?
Okay.
So maybe to help have a little fun with this discussion, it's kind of interesting to look back in time, and everybody has a different opinion. We can cite different sources, but 5 years ago, they claimed that about 11 zettabytes were created. Okay, 3 zettabytes were stored. So what is that? That's like the difference between what was created and stored is a factor of 3 to 4, right? Now you roll the clock forward, what they're projecting in 3 years, and it's over 100 zettabytes is going to be created, and 11 zettabytes is being stored. Kind of interesting that that's a factor of what, 9 to 10, whatever, right? Round numbers. So what does that tell you, or what do you think about that? I mean, is that suggesting we need to store less? Personally, I don't think so. Back to your question, do I think we need to store everything that's created? No. I mean, some data is transient, right?
Mhm.
But do I see a need to store more data? It depends on the use. We talked about some pretty interesting use cases which are driving that data growth. And I think because some of those use cases and technologies are fairly nascent, I think there's more reason and angst to store data just because, right? Because I don't want to lose it.
Yeah.
So
I can't make a decision whether or not it's valuable or not.
that's right. But then that creates a problem, right? Because you say, well, okay, if and Eric hasn't weighed in yet, but if that gap is too big, then why is that gap too big? And to me, then it gets into, well, is it cost effective to store it? Is it easy to find the data, right? I mean, as the haystack just gets bigger and bigger, now when you want to go find the needle, it becomes a data management, metadata, I mean, all sorts of problems and interesting challenges. That's personally why I think the gap is broadened. Not that everybody's decided we need to store less. I think that difference is probably the same or even narrower, quite frankly.
Yeah, so I'm recognizing that all of us are in the storage industry. So what I'm about to ask is kind of comical. But what if storage was absolutely free? What if it cost us nothing to store something? What problems would we have then? What if that 100 zettabytes of data were saved every year? What if we had it available to us, going forward in perpetuity? What kind of problem would we have at that point? And then you really highlight the data management
Yep.
out of the problem that people aren't that are really just beginning to be talked about. And maybe that's interesting. Maybe that is the barrier, more than the ability to store. Maybe the barrier is my ability to actually use that much data is more of a counterbalance against storing it.
Yeah. Go ahead, Adrian.
Oh, well, I was going to say, yeah, I think we're seeing some of that in the consumer space with let's say your iPhone or your Android. They're capturing so much, we're capturing so much digital information at this point. I mean, I have like 100 shots of my daughter's last soccer game, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they're doing a really good job of personalizing technology. In fact, I open my phone and I see, this is what you were doing 5 years ago. Right. And it's good to see that memory and have that connection. I think it's only a matter of time until you get those types of technologies coming into the enterprise world. Scott, you have an opinion on that too?
Well, first I'd say we're a big fan of yours and everybody else who does that. And if you want to do 1,000 shots versus 100 shots, go for it.
Yeah.
No, I do think, we're kind of I want it all and I want it all now sort of mentality, right? And so I think we've just become this human nature. We've just become that out. If I can afford it, I'll store it all. But then we get frustrated. Then when we want to go find that that golden nugget, whatever that might be, that one picture of your daughter, and you can't find that one because you've got a plethora of them, right? So that's the challenge we create with ourselves. But I think it's a good challenge, and I think the industry is continuing to evolve to help solve those challenges. Because I don't see our appetite for storing data going down, right? I think it's going to ever increase, and so it's up to us collectively to go solve that problem so we make it easier for whomever the end user or the consumers are.
Yeah, and I know we've said it on lots of webinars before, but the to that point about organization and management and finding something, we're trying to still break ourselves out of this, arguably 1970s mentality of a nice single hierarchy of a file system where you organize something by subdirectories and you make subdirectories within subdirectories, and then eventually you drop in your files, maybe your photos. But that really doesn't speak to the way that somebody thinks about trying to get that information back or use it in the future. Because again, Adrian wants to go look for pictures from a soccer game. You can remember when you shot that, or even anything else that was going on around the time. You're going to be thinking about it in a different context than you might when you're trying to back it up or archive it. And so it points to the need for being able to organize and find content and categorize content in different ways. And I'll just start out saying, is metadata the answer? I think so. Is counting on us humans to produce that metadata how we're going to get there? I don't have any hope for that. Because we have had the ability to tag and describe and put information on files. We've had that for years, and we all think it's great and we'd love to use it, but none of us want to put that data on the files that we produce or the information that we produce. And so really it goes into this, you need an ecosystem that is going to take the data and store it that you put, but then also itself have mechanisms to augment and decorate that with metadata that you can then use, 3, 4, 5, 10 years into the future. And so describing things is a huge challenge right now. The user interfaces for searching on that are huge challenges right now to effectively use all the data that we're producing.
Yeah, agreed. And that's where AI and ML come in. And I mean, to be quite honest, I mean, it's if you don't have an iPhone, I'm not sure if everyone has an iPhone, but they do a really good job with their recognition technology and the dates and leveraging what you just spoke about, Eric.
Yeah.
And again, I know organizations are working on it too, like
using GPS data in it to say, what else happened in that area. It's like, oh, well, you had 3 soccer games that took place in that city, at 3 different times. So.
And we're seeing it in sports video, we're seeing it in Netflix with their recommendations, Disney with their recommendations. So, it's out there. I think certain organizations, enterprise organizations, are leveraging it. It's only a matter of time until it becomes kind of commonplace out there. So, I mean, we're approaching the half hour now. Went by really fast. But I mean, what recommendations do you have? We'll start with Scott. Recommendations for organizations out there. They know they have to go dense. How do they get started? Like, what should they do?
Well, I think it really gets back to sort of understanding, some of the requirements, today and over time. I mean, what we're about is providing choice, right? If you need something dense, we've got some options. If you don't need something as dense, and this is just within hard drives, but then we have SSDs that, we have a variety of different technologies that we can help depending on what the problem or series of problems are. So I think it's really trying to understand, is it more of again, not to oversimplify, but is it more of a capacity play or is it more of a performance play? And as we talked about before, the current driver may change over time because it may be a combination of scale up, scale out. So, obviously, if you're looking for, if the use case is for large capacity and long-term retention for whatever reason, insurance compliance, or just because you want to be safe, then capacity is going to be a big play. If it's not about that and it's further up the stack, if you will, and it's about performance, then I think it's going to be more about the spindle count, like we talked about before, and some lower capacity. But all of those things tend to change over time. So we're about providing that underpinning so that then with partners like you can help with the data management and kind of that assessment, and we can give you options and provide you great TCO, reliability, et cetera.
Eric, same question to you. Where do you recommend people get started?
I think that probably the most important factor is that wherever you start is not going to be what you want next, and what you want after that, and after that, and after that. And so, or put another way, you're going to be wrong. You're going to think that I'm buying a storage system to do just one thing. And you're right. When you start, that'll be the one thing you want to do with it. But then immediately you're going to want to do more stuff with it. And so having flexibility in your choice of storage is very important, because you're going to immediately then want to expand what it does. And so it might have started out as a performance play, but then you're going to say, but I'd also like to do. And now you're going to get into more of the dense stuff. Or you could go the other way around where you say, I just have some archives I want to put in it. And you're going to say, you know what? That actually works pretty well as primary storage for new application development going on. And so then you're going to get into more of the, I want to take that and I want to make it more performant and keep doing the thing that it's doing now. And so I think flexibility is probably the biggest thing to look for, because you're going to want it to do multiple things. At least that's the trend we see with our customers. We have some customers coming back now that bought very dense. We're only going to archive it. We're rarely going to read from it. Now they're coming back and say, you know what, we want to do more with it. We want to actually put, live user data in it, home directory kind of stuff in the system. We want to start using features from the applications that exist now that didn't exist 5 years ago. And so just flexibility.
And how quickly do? Oh, go ahead, Scott.
No, I think it's interesting because I think also people find that, hey, I've got some of these precious assets and I was saving them just in case, or I had to, right, for regulation or compliance. But then they realize, hey, some of those I might be able to remonetize. And so the accessibility, I think then they find out that, it's not just set and forget, as Derek described before, but, hey, there's some value there. And so then it becomes kind of a mix.
Yeah, that's actually a great point, is that the application that wrote the data and you initially thought it's this application that's using it, that in 2 years, 3 years, you may think of a different application that can reuse that data and monetize it in a different way, or just do something different with it. So it doesn't have to be this locked environment where the person that produced it is the only one that can use it. We had a good webinar with the sports video folks a few months ago, where we're talking about who knew 2020 was going to turn out like it was, and we weren't going to have much in the way of any new sports content produced this year. So suddenly those archives became their revenue source for this year. Digging out and remixing old sports footage became a huge asset to them. So good points.
Agreed. And as we always do on Brews and Bites, we always ask for words of wisdom, whether it's relating to this topic or maybe just words of wisdom for someone to have a happy, healthy life. So we'll start with you, Eric. Any words of wisdom for viewers out there?
No, I'm not being creative. I'm going to come back to what I said with be flexible, because whatever you think you could plan something carefully to the nth degree today, and as soon as you start doing whatever it is you're going to do, it's going to be the world's going to change on you. And so whether that's with your storage deployment or how you're going to use it, that's one thing. We've gotten a lot more flexible this year in terms of how we do remote meetings and conduct our our businesses and our school and personal lives remotely. So just flexibility, because it's all going to be different than you predict.
It's pretty good.
How can you predict something that you can't be predicted?
Yeah. How about you, Scott? Words of wisdom.
I was kind of going to go down a similar angle. I mean, nobody would have predicted, what we're all going through, and we're all adapting. But I think, you do need to think further ahead, I think, and think about the unpredictable and, different alternatives, because as soon as you think you kind of map it out, 1 year, 2 year, 5 years out. I mean, any of us trying to map things out beyond probably 2 or 3 years, I think to Eric's point, we're probably guaranteed to be wrong. So we need to think about some of those what ifs and make sure that we haven't sort of boxed ourselves in a corner, right? So I think it's a combination of, partnerships like this, where we work together and we can work with our mutual customers to make sure that we have all the bases covered, even if some of them are corner cases.
Yeah. And with that, I mean, where does someone go to actually find out more information about, WD and platforms, Scott?
You can go to our website, and it's pretty easy to get to the platforms page on the website. And, some of the things that we talked about in terms of high capacity storage, we've got a, very current white paper that talks about, our 6 generations of high capacity helium drives and all the technologies that we're investing in. So it's a very good read. It's not, it's not super long, but I think people will appreciate the technologies that kind of come into play in terms of this ever increasing demand, insatiable appetite for capacity.
Yeah, and I'll answer it for us, Eric. Caringo, you go to caringo.com. We have a lot of great resources in the resources section. We'll actually be coming out with a solutions brief with WD here in a few weeks. So if you are interested in that, just go ahead and email us at info@caringo.com, and we'll get that to you once it's done. And with that, we have come to the end of our Brews and Bites. So, gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for your time. Scott, thank you so much for your time.
Hey, I enjoyed it. Cheers.
Cheers. And Eric, as always, thank you for your time. And anything else you would like to say, either of you would like to say before we conclude?
Stay safe, stay positive.
Yep.
All right, that's pretty good. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Bye.